Try something for 3 seconds. Just try to find yourself, not your thoughts. You can watch those come and go. Not your body. That's just sensation. Not your emotions. Those shift every hour. The thing that's looking, the one that's aware right now, reading these words, deciding whether this is worth your time. Find that. Most people, when they actually try, come up empty. Not because they aren't paying attention, but because there might not be anything there to find. Buddhism has been sitting with that discovery for 2,500 years. Neuroscience arrived at the same place about 40 years ago, through brain scans and split-brain experiments, and some of the most disorienting research in the history of modern science. They used completely different methods. They spoke completely different languages, and they found the same thing, or rather, the same absence of a thing. That's what this video is about. Let's start with what we assume. You wake up every morning with a felt sense that there is a you, continuous, stable. The same person who went to sleep last night, the same person who was embarrassed in front of their whole class at age 9, the same person who will be held responsible tomorrow for what you decide today. That sense of continuity, of being a single, unified experiencer moving through time, feels so obvious it barely seems worth questioning. But here's what's actually true. The neurons firing in your brain right now are organized completely differently than they were 10 years ago. The beliefs you hold, the things that frighten you, the people you love, nearly all of it has changed. Even the memories you use to construct a sense of personal history are not recordings, they are reconstructions. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it slightly differently, using who you are now, not who you were then. So the self that feels so solid and continuous is, at minimum, being assembled fresh in every moment. The question is whether there's something doing the assembling, or whether the assembling is all there is. Buddhism answered this question long before there was a word for neuroscience. The teaching is called Anattā. It's usually translated as no self, which sounds like a denial of your existence. But that's not quite what it means. The Buddha wasn't saying you don't exist. He was saying that what you call the self is not a fixed, permanent, independent thing. It's a process, a stream of arising and passing events, thoughts, perceptions, sensations, moments of awareness that happen in sequence so quickly that the mind stitches them together into the illusion of a continuous experiencer. Think of a river. You look at it, and you call it the same river every day, but the water is never the same water. The banks shift, the depth changes. What you're pointing at when you say that river is a pattern, not a thing. Buddhism says, you are exactly like this. The pattern feels real because it is real. But there is no fixed entity underneath it holding it together. This wasn't meant to be depressing. In the Buddhist framework, clinging to the idea of a permanent self is actually the root of most human suffering. If there is no fixed self, there is also nothing that can be permanently threatened, permanently humiliated, permanently lost. The teaching was meant to be liberating, but it is genuinely strange, and it gets stranger when you realize that 25 centuries later, a group of scientists with no interest in Buddhist philosophy arrived at almost the same conclusion through a completely different door. The neuroscience of the self begins with a patient known in the literature only as WJ. In the 1960s, a surgeon named Roger Sperry performed an operation on WJ to treat severe epilepsy. He cut the corpus callosum, the thick band of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The epilepsy improved. But what emerged from the research that followed was something nobody had expected. When Sperry's team showed an image to the left visual field of these split-brain patients, meaning information went only to the right hemisphere, the patients could pick up the object in their left hand. But when asked to explain what they were holding, they couldn't say. The left hemisphere, which controls speech, had no access to what the right hemisphere knew. So far, that sounds like a communication problem. Here's where it gets unsettling. The left hemisphere didn't say, "I don't know." It confabulated. It invented a plausible story, instantly and confidently. The verbal, narrative self simply made something up to maintain the illusion of being in charge. What this suggested, and decades of subsequent research has deepened this, is that the unified self you experience is at least partly a story your brain tells after the fact. Not a captain issuing orders, more like a narrator arriving after the decisions have already been made, constructing a coherent account of why they happened. The philosopher and neuroscientist Thomas Metzinger spent years trying to work out exactly what this means. His conclusion was stark. He called the self a phenomenal self-model, a kind of internal simulation the brain runs to represent itself to itself. It's functional. It's useful. It allows you to plan, to have a coherent perspective, to act in the world. But it is not a thing. It is a model. And crucially, the brain doesn't label it as a model. It presents it as reality, as you. Metzinger put it this way: no one has ever been or had a self. What exists are self-models. The feeling of being someone is real. The someone is not. This is almost word for word the Buddhist insight. Not metaphorically, not poetically, technically, the stream of arising phenomena that Buddhism describes and the dynamic self-model that neuroscience describes are pointing at the same underlying architecture. Both traditions are saying the experience of being a unified self is genuine. The unified self that seems to be having the experience is a construction, a very convincing, very useful, deeply ingrained construction, but a construction. There is one place where they diverge, and it's not a small divergence. Neuroscience can describe the self-model. It can map the brain regions involved, measure the timing, observe what happens when the system breaks down. What it cannot do, what remains entirely outside its methods, is explain why the model feels like anything at all. Why there is something it is like to be you, reading this sentence right now. This is what the philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. You can explain every function the brain performs. You can trace every process. But at the end of all that explanation, you still haven't explained the experience itself. The redness of red. The felt quality of a memory. The raw sense of being present. Buddhism doesn't solve this either, but it approaches it differently. The tradition doesn't try to eliminate consciousness from the picture. It treats awareness itself as the one thing that cannot be deconstructed. You can dismantle the self. You can see through the narrative. But the knowing, the bare, simple fact that experience is happening, that remains. Some schools of Buddhist philosophy call this Rigpa, or Buddha nature. Not a self, but not nothing. So here is where both traditions leave us. The self as you normally think of it, unified, continuous, in charge, is almost certainly a construction. Buddhism knew this through introspection. Neuroscience confirmed it through experiment. But the awareness in which that construction appears, whatever that is neither tradition can fully account for. Go back to what you tried at the beginning. You looked for the thing that's aware. You came up empty. But here's what's strange. Something noticed the emptiness. Something was present for the search, even when the search found nothing. Buddhism would say that awareness is not a self. It's just knowing, without an owner. Neuroscience would say the search itself was just another process in the self model, the brain looking at itself and finding only more brain. Both answers are honest. Both are unsatisfying in exactly the right way. If there is no fixed self, who has been watching this entire video? Leave your answer below. Not the philosophical answer, the one that comes before you think about it. Enjoy the intellectual discussion so far? Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can reach like minds.